All right, I'm back with I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. Geographic borders. Although most of the theoretical formulations and empirical studies of the borderline syndrome have been conducted in the United States, other countries like Canada, Mexico, Israel, Sweden, Denmark, and other Western European nations and the USSR have recognized borderline pathologies within their populations. Comparative studies are scant at this point, but could provide great insight into the child-rearing cultural and social threads that compose the casual fabric of the syndrome. Wow, that was a line full of a sentence. And yes, my dog is drinking in the background. He's a horse. Borderline behavior in well-known people and fictional characters. Whether the borderline personality is a new phenomenon or simply a new label for an interrelated cluster of internal feelings and external behaviors is a topic of considerable debate in the mental health community. Most psychiatrists believe that the borderline syndrome has been around for quite some time, and its increasing prominence results not so much from the mind of the patient, but from the mind of the clinician. Indeed, many psychiatrists believe that some of Freud's most interesting cases of neurosis at the turn of the century would today be clearly diagnosed as borderline. Perceived in this way, the borderline syndrome becomes an interesting new perspective from which to understand some of our most complex personalities, both past and present, real and fictional. Conversely, well-known figures and characters can be used to illustrate different aspects of the syndrome. Along these lines, biographers and others have speculated that the term might apply to such wide-ranging figures as Marilyn Monroe, Zelda Fitzgerald, Thomas Wolfe, T.E. Lawrence, Adolf Hitler, Muammar Gaddafi. Cultural critics can observe borderline features in Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire, Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Sally Bowles in Cabaret, Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, Howard Beale in Network, Carmen in Bizet's Opera, and Terry Dunn in Looking for Mr. Goodbar. The question of borderline pathology, am I on? Yeah, I think I am. To one degree or another, we all struggle with the same issues as the borderline. The threat of separation, fear of rejection, and confusion about identity, feelings of emptiness and boredom. How many of us have not had a few intense, unstable relationships, or flew into a rage now and then, or felt the allure of ecstatic states, or dreaded being alone, or gone through mood changes, or been self-destructive in some way? If nothing else, BPD serves to remind us that the line between normal and pathological may sometimes be a very thin one. Do we all display to one degree or another some symptoms of borderline personality? The answer is probably yes, but not all of us are controlled by the syndrome to the degree that it disrupts or rules our lives. With its extremes of emotion, thought, and behavior, BPD represents some of the best and worst of human character and of our society in the waning years of the 20th century. By exploring its depths and boundaries, we may be facing up to our ugliest instincts and our highest potentials, and the hard road we must travel to get from one point to the other. All right, Chapter 2, Chaos and Emptiness. I sometimes wonder if I'm possessed by the devil, says Carrie, a social worker in the psychiatric unit of a large hospital. I don't understand myself. All I know is this borderline personality of mine has forced me into a life where I've cut everyone out. So it's very, very lonely. Carrie was diagnosed with borderline syndrome in 1983 after 22 years of therapy, medications, and hospitalizations for a variety of mental and physical illness. By then, her medical file resembled a well-worn passport. The pages stamped with the numerous psychiatric territories through which she had traveled. For years, I was in and out of hospitals, but I never found a therapist who understood me and knew what I was going through. Carrie's parents were divorced when she was an infant, and she was raised by her alcoholic mother until she was 9. A boarding school took care of her for 4 years after that. When she was 21, overwhelming depression forced her to seek therapy. She was diagnosed and treated for depression at that time. A few years later, her moods began to fluctuate wildly, and she was treated for bipolar disorder, which is also known as manic depression. Throughout this period, she repeatedly overdosed on medications and cut her wrists many times. I was cutting myself and overdosing on tranquilizers, antidepressants, or whatever drug I happened to be on, she recalls. It had become almost a way of life. In her mid-20s, she began to have auditory hallucinations and became severely paranoid. At this time, she was hospitalized for the first time and diagnosed with schizophrenia. And still later in life, Carrie was hospitalized in a cardiac care unit numerous times for severe chest pains, subsequently recognized to be anxiety-related. She went through periods of binge eating and starvation and fasting. Over a period of several weeks, her weight would vary by as much as 70 pounds. Whoa. When she was 32, she was brutally raped by a physician on the staff of the hospital in which she worked. Soon after, she returned to school and was drawn into a sexual relationship with one of her female professors. By the age of 42, her collection of medical files was filled with almost every diagnosis imaginable, including schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, hypochondriasis, anxiety, anorexia nervosa, sexual dysfunction, and post-traumatic stress disorder following the rape. Despite her mental and physical problems, Carrie was able to perform her work fairly well. Though she changed jobs frequently and she managed to complete a doctorate in social work, she was even able to teach for a while at a small women's college. Her personal relationships, however, were severely limited. The only relationship I've had with men were the ones in which I was sexually abused. A few men have wanted to marry me, but I have a big problem with getting close or being touched. I can't tolerate it. It makes me want to run. I was engaged a couple times, but had to break them off. It's unrealistic of me to think I could be anybody's wife. As for friends, she says, I'm very self-absorbed. I say everything I think, feel, know, and don't know. It's so hard for me to get interested in other people. After more than 20 years of treatment, Carrie's symptoms were finally recognized and diagnosed in 1983 as BPD. Her dysfunction evolved from ingrained, enduring personality traits more indicative of a personality or trait disorder than her previously diagnosed transient state illness. The most difficult part of being a borderline personality has been the emptiness, the loneliness, and the intensity of feeling. She says today, the extreme behaviors kept me so confused. At times I don't know what I'm feeling or who I am. A better understanding of Carrie's illness has led to more consistent treatment. Medications have been useful for treating acute symptoms and providing the glue for maintaining a more coherent sense of self. At the same time, she has acknowledged the limitations of the medications. Her psychiatrist, working with her other physicians, has helped her to understand the connection between her physical complaints and her anxiety and to avoid unnecessary medical tests, drugs, and surgeries. Psychotherapy has been geared for the long haul, focusing on her dependency and stabilization of her identity and relationships, rather than on an endless succession of acute emergencies. Carrie, at 46, has had to learn that an entire set of previous behaviors are no longer acceptable. I don't have the option of cutting myself or overdosing or being hospitalized anymore. I vowed I would live in and deal with the real world, but I tell you, it's a frightening place. I'm not sure yet whether I can do it or whether I want to do it. Borderline, a personality disorder. Carrie's journey through this maze of psychiatric and medical symptoms and diagnoses exemplifies the confusion and desperation experienced by individuals afflicted with mental illness and by those who minister to them. Though the specifics of Carrie's case might be considered extreme by some, thousands of women and men suffer similar problems with relationships, intimacy, depression, and drug abuse. Perhaps if she had been diagnosed earlier and more accurately, she could have been spared some of the pain and loneliness. Though borderline personalities suffer a tangle of painful symptoms that clearly disrupt their lives, only recently have psychiatrists begun to understand the disorder and treat it effectively. I'm going to go ahead and end now, and I'll pick back up on page 20 in my next reading. Thank you.